Welcome to this comprehensive examination of Czechoslovak tanks during the Second World War. When we discuss tank warfare in World War II, Czechoslovak armor holds a unique and tragic position in history. This is not a story of Czechoslovak tanks fighting for Czechoslovak independence, but rather the tale of excellent tank designs created by Czech engineers that were seized by Nazi Germany, used against the Allies, and became integral to the Wehrmacht's early war successes. Today, we will explore the complete history of Czechoslovak tanks during World War II, examining the innovative designs created by Czech industry, their forced service in German hands, and the small numbers that served with Allied and resistance forces. Czechoslovakia's interwar period was marked by remarkable industrial and technical achievement. The newly formed nation after World War I inherited substantial industrial capacity from the Austro-Hungarian Empire and developed it further. Czech engineering firms, particularly Škoda and ČKD, Českomoravská Kolbendánek, became world leaders in tank design and manufacturing. Czech tanks were exported to numerous countries including Romania, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Switzerland, Iran, Peru, and others. Czech designs were innovative, featuring excellent armor distribution, reliable engines, and effective armament. By 1938, Czechoslovakia possessed one of the strongest tank industries in Europe. However, this impressive capability was never used for Czechoslovak defense. The Munich Agreement of September 1938 and subsequent German occupation in March 1939 transferred Czech tank production to German control without a shot being fired. German forces immediately seized hundreds of Czech tanks from the Czechoslovak army, incorporating them into Wehrmacht service as Panzers 35T and 38T, with the T designation standing for Czechish, Czech. German occupation of Czech factories meant that tank production continued under German direction, with Czech workers forced to produce tanks for their occupiers. This created the bitter irony of Czech tanks serving the Wehrmacht during the invasions of Poland, France, the Balkans, and the initial phases of Operation Barbarossa. Czech tanks formed substantial portions of German armored divisions, with entire panzer divisions equipped primarily with Czech vehicles. The PZKPFW 38 Tori T, in particular, became one of Germany's most important light tanks of the early war period. Czech designs proved so successful that German industry continued producing Czech-designed tanks and derivatives throughout the war. The story of Czechoslovak tanks is therefore primarily the story of excellent designs serving an enemy that had conquered their homeland without resistance. Only small numbers of Czech tanks escaped to serve with Allied forces or resistance movements, while the vast majority fought for Germany. Let us now examine these remarkable vehicles, beginning with the light tanks that represented the core of Czech armored production. Light tanks, pre-war Czechoslovak designs. LT vs 35. The LT vs 35, designated Panzer 35T, in German service, was one of Czechoslovakia's most successful tank designs and became an important Wehrmacht vehicle. Developed by Škoda in the mid-1930s, the LT vs N35 represented modern tank technology and was adopted by the Czechoslovak Army in 1936. By the time of German occupation in March 1939, Czechoslovakia had manufactured approximately 434 LT vs N35 tanks for its own forces and export customers. The LT vs 35 measured 4.90 meters in length, 2.06 meters in width, and 2.21 meters in height. It weighed approximately 10.5 tons combat loaded. Power came from a Škoda T11 six-cylinder gasoline engine producing 120 horsepower, giving a maximum speed of 35 kilometers per hour on roads. Range was approximately 190 kilometers. The four-man crew consisted of commander, gunner, loader, and driver, a reasonable crew distribution for a light tank of its era. Primary armament consisted of a 37mm Škoda A3 gun mounted in the turret, along with two 7.92mm ZB-53 machine guns, one coaxial and one in the hull. The 37mm gun could penetrate approximately 40-50 millimeters of armor at combat ranges, making it effective against most contemporary light and medium tanks. The gun could fire armor-piercing, high-explosive, and other ammunition types. Armor protection ranged from 8 to 35 millimeters, with frontal surfaces having the thickest protection. While not heavy, this armor provided reasonable protection against contemporary anti-tank weapons. The LT Vers 35 featured several advanced design elements for its time. The pneumatic power-assisted steering and braking systems were innovative, though they proved somewhat unreliable under harsh field conditions and required careful maintenance. The suspension provided good cross-country mobility. The riveted construction was standard for the period, though this created the rivet spalling hazard when the armor was struck. The turret traverse was powered using the engine, a significant advantage over hand-crank systems. When Germany occupied Czechoslovakia in March 1939, Wehrmacht forces immediately seized the approximately 219 LT Vers 35 tanks in Czechoslovak Army service, redesignating them as Panzerkampfwagen 35T. These tanks equipped the German 6th Panzer Division, which used them during the invasion of Poland in September 1939 and the Battle of France in 1940. German crews found the Panzer 35T to be an effective light tank with good firepower and mobility. The 37mm gun was adequate against Polish and French light tanks, while the armor provided reasonable protection. However, the Panzer 35T suffered from significant mechanical reliability issues in German service. The pneumatic steering and braking systems proved troublesome, particularly in cold weather and dusty conditions. Maintenance requirements were higher than for simpler German designs. These problems became critical during Operation Barbarossa in 1941, when mechanical failures plagued 6th Panzer Division's Panzer 35T. The harsh Soviet conditions and inadequate spare parts supply meant that many tanks were lost to breakdowns rather than enemy action. By late 1941, the Panzer 35T was being withdrawn from frontline service with German forces due to obsolescence and mechanical unreliability. Many were transferred to Romanian forces, Germany's ally, where they saw extensive service on the Eastern Front. Romanian troops operated Panzer 35Ts until 1944, using them in defensive operations and anti-partisan missions. The tanks proved adequate for Romanian needs, though still plagued by mechanical issues. Several other nations operated the LT Vers 35 or its derivatives. Romania had purchased 126 R2 tanks, an export variant, before the war. Slovakia, the German puppet state created from Czechoslovakia's eastern portion, operated 79 LT Vers 35s in its army. Bulgaria purchased approximately 36 tanks. These exports meant that the LT Vers 35 family saw service with multiple Axis-aligned nations, though none achieved the combat success that might have been possible had the tanks served in Czechoslovak hands defending their homeland. LT Vers 38. The LT Vers 38, designated Panzer 38T in German service, became one of the most important Czech tank designs and one of Germany's primary light tanks during the early war years. Developed by ČKD, later BMM under German occupation, in 1938 as a private venture intended for export, the LT Vers 38 never served with the Czechoslovak army. German occupation in March 1939 occurred before Czechoslovak forces could accept the design. Instead, Germany immediately recognized the tank's excellence and ordered it into production as the Panzerkampfwagen 38T. The Panzer 38T measured 4.61 meters in length, 2.12 meters in width, and 2.40 meters in height. It weighed approximately 9.7 tons for early variants, increasing to 10.5 tons for later models. Power came from a Praga EPA 6-cylinder gasoline engine, producing 125 horsepower in early models and 150 horsepower in later versions, giving a maximum speed of 42 kilometers per hour. Range was approximately 250 kilometers. The four-man crew consisted of commander, gunner, loader, and driver. Primary armament was a 37mm Škoda A7 gun, an improved weapon compared to earlier Czech tanks. This gun could penetrate approximately 50 millimeters of armor at combat ranges, making it effective against most light and medium tanks of 1939-1941. Secondary armament consisted of two 7.92mm MG-37T machine guns. Armor protection ranged from 10 to 50 millimeters on later variants, with early models having 10-25 millimeters. The frontal armor was well sloped, improving effective protection. The Panzer 38T featured excellent design characteristics that made it one of the best light tanks of its era. The simple, reliable Praga engine was easy to maintain and provided good performance. The transmission and running gear were robust and reliable. The suspension, using leaf springs, provided good ride quality and cross-country performance. The riveted construction was gradually replaced by welding in later production. The tank's reliability was exceptional by contemporary standards, with German crews praising its mechanical dependability. German production of the Panzer 38T continued from 1939 to 1942, with approximately 1,414 tanks manufactured. This made it one of the most numerous German tanks of the early war period. The Panzer 38T equipped several German panzer divisions and saw extensive combat service in Poland, France, the Balkans, North Africa, and particularly on the Eastern Front during Operation Barbarossa and the subsequent campaigns of 1941 to 1942. During the invasion of Poland in September 1939, Panzer 38Ts proved effective against Polish tanks and anti-tank weapons. The 37mm gun was adequate for defeating Polish 7TP light tanks and other vehicles, while the armor provided reasonable protection. German crews appreciated the tank's reliability and good handling characteristics. The Panzer 38T performed better mechanically than the Panzer 35T, requiring less maintenance and suffering fewer breakdowns. In the Battle of France in 1940, Panzer 38Ts fought against French and British forces. The tanks proved capable of engaging French light tanks like the Renault R35 and Hotchkiss H3539 with success. Against heavier French tanks like the Char B1 or British Matildas, the 37mm gun was inadequate, but these encounters were relatively rare. The Panzer 38T's reliability and good mobility contributed to German operational success. Operation Barbarossa in June 1941 saw Panzer 38Ts participate in the initial German onslaught against the Soviet Union. The 7th, 8th, 12th, 19th, and 20th Panzer Divisions were equipped primarily or partially with Panzer 38Ts. The tanks proved effective against Soviet T-26 and BT series light tanks. However, encounters with T-34 medium tanks and KV-1 heavy tanks revealed the Panzer 38T's inadequacy against modern Soviet armor. The 37mm gun could not penetrate T-34 or KV-1 frontal armor at any practical range, while Soviet tank guns easily destroyed Panzer 38Ts. Despite this obsolescence against Soviet medium and heavy tanks, the Panzer 38T continued serving effectively in other roles. The tank remained useful for reconnaissance, infantry support against unarmored targets, and fighting against lighter enemy vehicles. The excellent reliability meant that Panzer 38Ts remained operational when other German tanks broke down, making them valuable even when outgunned. German commanders appreciated having reliable tanks, even if their armament was inadequate against the heaviest opponents. By 1942, the Panzer 38T was recognized as obsolete for tank versus tank combat. Production of the tank variant ceased, but the excellent chassis continued in production for various derivatives. The Panzer 38T chassis was used as the basis for the Marder III tank destroyer, mounting more powerful guns including the 75mm PAK-40 anti-tank gun and the 76.2mm Soviet gun. These tank destroyers proved highly effective, giving the reliable Czech chassis new combat relevance with modern firepower. The chassis was also used for the Grill self-propelled gun, Hetzer tank destroyer, a later development, and various other specialized vehicles. The widespread use of the Panzer 38T chassis for derivatives meant that Czech engineering continued contributing to German armored warfare throughout the war. The Hetzer tank destroyer, entering service in 1944, was essentially a completely new vehicle using design elements from the Panzer 38T, but featuring better armor and a 75mm gun. Over 2,800 Hetzers were produced, serving until war's end and continuing in post-war Czechoslovak and Swiss service. Several other nations operated the Panzer 38T or variants. Slovakia received approximately 69 tanks, Romania obtained some through German transfers, and Hungary received a few. The widespread distribution of the type testified to its effectiveness as a light tank for the 1939-1941 period. T&H series. The T&H series represented export variants of Czech light tanks developed by ČKD for foreign customers. These tanks shared design elements with the LTV's 38, but were tailored to customer requirements. Various T&H models were exported before and during the war to countries including Sweden, Switzerland, Peru, Iran, and Lithuania. Sweden purchased 90 STRV M41 tanks, Swedish-built versions of the TNH design manufactured under license. These served in the Swedish Army throughout and after the war, never seeing combat due to Swedish neutrality. Switzerland purchased 24 PZM 39 tanks, also based on TNH design. Peru received 24 tanks. Iran purchased tanks that were diverted to Britain after the war began. These exports demonstrated the international recognition of Czech tank design quality. The TNH export tanks featured similar specifications to the Panzer 38T, with 37mm guns, comparable armor, and good mechanical reliability. Each nation's version had unique features adapted to specific requirements, but all shared the fundamental soundness of Czech engineering. The tanks that saw combat performed adequately, while those in neutral nations provided training and defensive capability without being tested in battle. Medium tanks, development programs, T-21 and T-22 medium tank projects. Czechoslovakia developed several medium tank prototypes in the late 1930s, including the T-21 and T-22 projects by Škoda. These designs featured heavier armor and more powerful guns than light tanks, intended to provide Czechoslovak forces with medium tank capability. The T-21 prototype, developed in 1937-1938, weighed approximately 16 tons and was armed with a 47mm gun. These projects never reached production before German occupation. The prototypes were seized by German forces, who evaluated them but decided against production, preferring to focus on German designs and Czech light tank production. The T-21 and T-22 represented what Czechoslovak armored forces might have fielded had the nation retained independence, but remained unfulfilled potential. ST-VZN-39, T-24, medium tank. The ST-VZN-39, also known as T-24, was a medium tank design developed by KD in 1939. This tank was intended to provide Czechoslovakia with a modern medium tank comparable to German Panzer IIIs and IVs. However, German occupation in March 1939 prevented any production for Czechoslovak forces. Only a few prototypes were completed, which German authorities evaluated. The ST-VZN-39 weighed approximately 15 tons and was armed with a 47mm gun, later prototypes considering 75mm armament. Armor thickness reached 30-50mm, providing good protection for its era. The design featured a 250 horsepower engine, giving good mobility. German evaluation found the design promising, but decided that Czech production capacity was better used for proven light tank designs and derivatives rather than developing a new medium tank. Had Czechoslovakia remained independent, the ST-VZN-39 might have equipped Czech armored divisions alongside light tanks, providing a balanced force. Instead, the design remained a prototype, another example of Czech engineering capability that was never realized for Czech purposes. The story of Czechoslovak tanks during World War II is a tragedy of excellent engineering serving an occupying power. Czechoslovak tank designers created world-class vehicles that were exported globally and recognized as among the best of their type. The LT-VZN-35 and LT-VZN-38 represented modern light tank design, featuring good firepower, reasonable armor protection, and exceptional reliability. These tanks should have defended Czechoslovak independence and sovereignty. Instead, German occupation without resistance meant that all Czech tanks and production capacity fell into German hands. The Wehrmacht immediately incorporated seized Czech tanks into its order of battle, with the Panzer 35T, equipping the 6th Panzer Division and the Panzer 38T, becoming one of Germany's most numerous light tanks. Czech designs proved their worth in German service, participating in major campaigns from Poland through France to the Soviet Union. The Panzer 38 Darny particularly distinguished itself through exceptional reliability and good combat performance against comparable opponents. German crews praised the tank's mechanical dependability, which contrasted favorably with more troublesome German designs. When obsolescence against heavier Soviet tanks ended the Panzer 38T's usefulness as a gun tank, the excellent chassis continued serving as the basis for the Marder III and Hetzer, vehicles that remained combat effective until war's end. The continued production of Czech-designed tanks and derivatives throughout the war testified to the fundamental soundness of Czech engineering. Škoda and KD factories, under German control, produced over 1,400 Panzer 38T gun tanks, thousands of Marder III tank destroyers, and thousands of Hetzers. Czech workers were forced to produce weapons for their occupiers, and Czech designs contributed substantially to German military capability. Only small numbers of Czech tanks escaped to serve with resistance forces, allied armies, or nations that switched sides. The Slovak national uprising briefly saw Czech tanks fighting against Germany, and Romanian forces used Czech tanks after switching sides in 1944. These instances represented small redemptions for designs that had primarily served the wrong side. After liberation, Czechoslovakia recovered control of its tank industry and continued producing derivatives of wartime designs, including the Hetzer tank destroyer. The post-war service of Czech-designed vehicles, both in Czechoslovakia and with countries like Switzerland that purchased them, demonstrated that the engineering had remained sound despite the political tragedy. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of Czechoslovak tanks in World War II. From the Škoda LT Vz 35 to the ČKD LT Vz 38, from the TNH export variants to the Hetzer derivatives, these vehicles represented Czech engineering excellence, tragically exploited by German occupation. The tanks that should have defended Czech freedom instead served German conquest, a bitter irony that serves as a reminder of the human costs of failed diplomacy and abandoned allies. Czech tank designers and workers deserve recognition for their technical achievements, while also being remembered as victims of circumstances beyond their control, forced to see their creations serve an enemy that had conquered their homeland without a fight.